we're going to speak about the letter that was sent by Keir Starmer. I'm just going to put this on the screen. I don't know how this is public, but anyway, it says the Labour Party stands with the Jewish community and fully condemns Roger Waters. Many people will think of Roger Waters as famous for being a member of one of the most important bands in history, but he is now more synonymous with spreading deeply troubling anti-Semitism, and that is why I believe this show should not be allowed to go ahead. Right, now, to speak about this, I've got two members of Jewish Voice for Labour, Mike Cushman, and we've also got Leah Levane. Do you like Pink Floyd?
Well, the one good thing out of the Furore is it reminded me to keep on replaying Dark Side of the Moon that I hadn't listened to for too long. So I spent yesterday afternoon listening to that.
And you're a fan of the music, obviously. So what's your reaction to what Keir Starmer said in that letter?
Well, it's not surprise is the first thing to say. The man never fails to disappoint. That where we start from is Roger is a stalwart supporter of Palestinian rights, as I hope everyone on this call is. And we all know that no license is given to anyone stepping off the two-state tram line. That if you don't echo the very narrowly accepted narrative about Israel and Palestine, then you will be traduced. You know, what did he say? I mean, we've looked back at the things they raise about Roger. He said things like, the Jewish lobby is extraordinarily powerful in the US. Well, it's true, it is. And there is a Jewish lobby. There's also an Israel lobby, which is even bigger and even more malicious, with both the Jewish Zionists and the Christian Zionists and many others rooting for support of the apartheid state in Israel. And he also accused Sheldon Adelson of pulling the strings of politicians like Trump. Now, Adelson is a man who made a lot of money out of casinos and is, in his own words, I mean, he's dead now, in his own words, you know, was an absolutely passionate defender of anything Israel did. And he put conditionality on his very large donations to politicians on their support for Israel. So Roger was blamed for invoking tropes. Roger didn't say Jews pulled strings. He said a particular person with very bad politics pulled the strings of politicians. That's true. It is deeply anti-Semitic to extend a complaint about one Jew to be about all Jews. That is anti-Semitism, and that is the anti-Semitism of the people who claim to be opponents of anti-Semite. We've got the pig, which we first saw flying over Battersea Power Station on the front page, on the LP cover, which appeared as a political symbol 10 or more years ago with many symbols on it, including the Magen David, the Star of David. But it was one symbol among many. And in fact, even the Anti-Defamation League, the most important American censor of what they claim to be anti-Semitism, even the ADL said it had no anti-Semitic intent. But of course, people like Starmer know better. But there is a problem that Israel has appropriated Magen David as a state symbol. So if you use a state symbol, you are, because of the actions of the Israeli state, also putting up a Jewish symbol. It's they who confuse Judaism and Israel all the time. They are the people who make criticism of Israel into criticism of Jews. But even the pig is a dead pig, It hasn't been seen for many years. It resurrected this year with totally different symbols on it, but this didn't stop the Roger's critics putting up pictures of 10 years ago. They can't deal with the present. They have to deal with the past that's imaginary to them. He dressed up with a fascist-like coat and armband. He did that to deride fascism. So if you attack fascism, you now become a fascist. This is the sort of tortuous logic of the avid seekers of anti-Semitism. It was complained that he put up a picture of Anne Frank and of Shireen Abu Akleh. Roger put up 12 images of people who have been killed by state violence, including people like Blair Peach, killed in Red Lion Square in London in the 1960s. George Floyd, murdered by American police. Rachel Corrie, run over by an Israeli bulldozer. Now, what's significant is that they don't complain about Anne Frank being compared to these people. It's if Anne Frank is compared to a Palestinian. Palestinians do not have the right to protection, that it's only if you compare a Jew to a Palestinian are you an anti-Semite, not if you compare a Jew to a New Zealander like Peach. So, this reveals a very deep anti-Palestinian racism. You are not allowed to grieve for the deaths of Palestinians. But it's worse than that. Anne Frank and all the 6 million Holocaust victims exist in history, not apart from it. And to invoke history, to understand the present, is what we have to do. Starmer and his ilk want to take the Holocaust out of history, to make it an event that we can only mourn, that we cannot learn from. You don't have to agree with everything Roger says. I don't. He gets things very wrong. But you don't have to, but to see this furor as a stunt to close down anyone speaking in defense of Palestinian rights, because if they can silence Roger with all of the strength that he has behind him, where does that leave the rest of us?
Right.
And it's not just Roger. All rock gods say things. They, other rock gods have waved Confederate flags. They've gone into anti-vax conspiracy. But the current is turned off in the third rail for them because they're not talking about Israel and Palestine. Such special pleading produces the hierarchy of racism that Martin Ford talked about in his report on the Labour Party. And it makes real anti-Semitism far harder to fight. So there's a selectivity. You can't enjoy Pink Floyd, you can't talk to Ken Loach, but you can celebrate vicious anti-Semites and pro-Nazis like Nancy Astor, like Rachel Reeves did, and do it with impunity. It's not just double standards, it's quadruple standards that is designed not just about Palestine, but about the whole socialist project.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Now, Leah, you said you wanted to see the Michael Gove letter, which has been put together with the Starmer one. I mean, people are putting the two together, and I've looked at the Michael Gove letter, and it's far more nuanced, is the word, or whatever they say. That it says here, the government is clear that everyone has a fundamental right to freedom of speech and artistic expression. So long as they remain within the boundaries set by law, there's also a societal expectation placed on people with a significant public profile to behave responsibly and not abuse their platform. This is an expectation of which Roger Waters is reportedly falling short. The UK has some of the strongest legislation in the world to tackle hate crime, and if you feel anything that Roger Waters says or does crosses the line into that which is unlawful, this should, of course, be reported to the police. he's not making a judgment there. He's saying, you know, the ball's in your court. If you think he's actually done something, let's have the evidence. So he's being polite, but he's not actually doing what Starmer did, is he?
He's not doing what Starmer did. I want to thank Mike for his contribution, saved me a lot of but really covered most of the points. There's a few I want to make. So on the letters, yeah, Gove certainly wanted to make it clear he was siding. He understood, or he supported what the Board of Deputies was saying. But actually, it was quite interesting that he said, if you think it crosses a line, go to the police. Nobody ever does, because it doesn't cross the line. It's the way in which all of the saga in the Labour Party hasn't resulted in any police prosecutions for hate crime, because there isn't, you know, and I think very few people have actually been expelled for anti-Semitism, although that's the rhetoric. And Starmer is, I don't actually, well, the only way in which I understand Starmer is he is clearly, and I know you're going to talk about it later, but the dropping of the Green, the one slightly progressive policy that they were committed to, they have dropped. Clearly, the ruling class have got to them and said, you can't do that, it's going to damage the oil companies too much. That's my conspiracy theorist bit. But I know you haven't got much time, and Mike has been really, really detailed and expansive, so I don't want to go into too much more, take up too much more of your time. But I wanted to emphasize, you know, and Mike alluded to it, so what's happened in relation to Jamie Driscoll has become another pylon on Ken Loach. So we have done a statement. I've seen it in the chat. Tony Greenstein is putting up his link to his blog, and I recommend reading it. And again, like Mike said about Roger Waters, you don't have to agree with everything Ken Loach has said or done around perdition in particular. But it's just rehashing this weaponization of anti-Semitism, just so that, I guess, so that Starmer can make it very, very clear that we're in a new Labour Party and they've dealt with it. And I feel that sometimes what gets forgotten with these senior politicians pontificating is that Roger and Ken are really upset. Now, we might think these are white men with lots of, you know, well-known and lots of backing. Actually, they are really, really hurt, and everybody else, you know, who gets these fake allegations, and the other thing is the way in which an apology from someone on the left counts for nothing. So, as Mike said, Rachel Reeves hasn't even had to apologise for backing, you know, supporting, you know, holding up Nancy Astor as a great example. Steve Reed apologised about using an anti-Semitic trope. Not a word has been said. His apology is totally accepted. So this is, you know, back to the double, if not quadruple standards. But I really want to remember, you know, people like Loki. I actually saw him last night perform. These personal attacks, and many of us have been subject to them, but we then probably don't get hauled through the press in quite the same way, just because we're less famous. And Mark Drakeford, not Mark Drakeford, whatever his name was, Drakeford, the ex-Tory,
Christian
sits on the Labour.
Christian Wakefield.
Christian Wakefield, there you go. Well, thank you. I'm sorry. Anyway, won't bore you with my computer problems. Lost all my notes. So yes, him using his parliamentary privilege to tell a bunch of lies and distortions about Roger Waters. And that's what happened, like the Jewish Labour Movement's letter, which they wrote to all councillors and MPs, or Labour ones at least, in the Northeast, was just full of these old allegations, rehashed and rehashed. And I'm proud to say that I think it was 12 Jewish people in the Northeast wrote to all the press and much more widely, and to basically say, this is a lot of nonsense and we're fed up with being used for political gains. And that's from a group of Jewish people who have very different political views, but all agree that we just don't need to be used in that way. And it's a dangerous, dangerous road, which we've discussed before. So Roger Waters, keep going. His Double Down News video, which apparently some platforms are trying to take off, but it's still there. The Double Down News is 20 minutes. It's worth every second of it, from Roger Waters himself. it just shows what a load of lies, and you see what a fine human being he is. And the fact that he may have said things or made mistakes, not that I'm saying he did, but we all have. So, for example, even about the Star of David on the pig, which was 10 years ago and not on the one that he's using at the moment, he actually found that people were upset. He took it off because he didn't want to upset people if there wasn't a reason to, because it was a symbol amongst many. But that doesn't mean you don't stand up for Palestinians.